Well, we get to kind of the middle of the dialogue here, and some things that are a little confusing, but let's take them one at a time. Um, Euthyphro has now said, well, what is the pious? The pious is that which is loved by the gods, and the impious is that which is hated by the gods. And that's how Socrates sums things up at the beginning of the reading. Come then, he says, and let us examine what we are saying. That thing or person which is dear to the gods is pious. This is what Euthyphro has said. And that thing or person which is hateful to the gods is impious. So whatever the gods love, that's what the pious is. And being pious means doing what the gods love, and being impious is doing whatever the gods hate. And and that seems to be, not a terribly implausible definition of piety. But Socrates, working on some things that earlier in the dialogue, Euthyphro has talked in justification of his own prosecution of his father, has referred to some incidents in Greek mythology, really their story about the gods, where fathers and sons fought so that there's some precedent for what he's doing. And Socrates picks up on that and says, well, you've referred to these stories where there were disagreements and fights between the gods. Well, yes. So sometimes the gods disagree on things. Well, yes. And what sort of things do we disagree? Like the length of a line, or the the sum of two numbers? No, we disagree on things that we consider to be just or unjust, right and wrong, and those we love those things which we consider to be right, and hate those things we consider to be wrong. So the gods disagree, and they disagree about what they love and what they hate. Well, yes. So some things are both loved and hated by the gods. Well, yeah, because different gods do fight. Well, then, if the pious is that which is loved by the gods, and the impious is that which is hated by the gods, and about the very same things, some gods love it and some gods hate it, then it would follow that the same thing would be both pious and impious, which can't be right. It's either pious or impious, I think. It can't be both. That's quite an interesting thing. I mean, what is he really doing here? In one way, you could say that what Socrates is doing is demanding that religion make sense, that it have a rational basis. And he certainly is. And some people would say, well, that's not what religion is at all. You can't expect religion to be rational and consistent. I mean, clearly, if we read the Old Testament, we read the Bible in general, we can't. There are things that are inconsistent with each other. It's just obvious about the Bible. And I think most people would say, well, that's because religion is not meant to be always rationally consistent. Maybe theology is, but theology is one part of religion. So that's a big step in this, is to get to that point where Socrates is clearly trying to show Euthyphro, listen, what you've told me is problematic. So you're going to have to kind of take a different approach to what you think piety is. And then we get to really the most difficult question, I think, of the dialogue, the trickiest thing. And that's here on page 4. After Socrates pointed out the inconsistency here, and he said, well, maybe we could just say that the pious is what all the gods love, and the impious is what all the gods hate. Okay, maybe that would help. And then we get to this idea of, well, okay, even so, he says here, he says, we shall know better, my good friend, in a little while. The point which I should first wish to understand is whether the pious or holy is beloved by the gods because it is holy, or holy because it is beloved of the gods. And this gets us some tricky conceptual, logical language. But hasn't Socrates brought up a very, very interesting question? The pious or holy. Is it pious or holy because the gods love it? Or do the gods love it because it is pious and holy? And especially what's said later on, where the pious and holy is clearly, well, is it always just? Is it always good? It brings up this incredibly important, I would say, question about religion in general and everything we associate religion. Religion, as we've seen from looking at, say, texts like the Ten Commandments, that God wants human beings to be moral. He wants them to be good. But what is the moral and what is the good? Is the moral and good what God says it is, or what the gods say it is? Or do the gods tell us to do something because those things are morally good? If you see what I mean there, it seems to be one of the deepest questions of religion. Um, is something right because God or the gods say it's right, or does God say it's right because it's right? That is independently of whatever God thinks. So it would seem to be an incredibly important kind of question to answer for yourself.